Welcome to our channel. Today, we discuss one of the most unsettling, controversial, and deeply misunderstood topics in human history, the science of cannibalism, and what happens when food runs out. This is not about shock value. It's not about horror movies or sensational headlines. It's about biology, survival, psychology, anthropology, and the extreme conditions that push human beings beyond what they ever imagined they were capable of doing. Cannibalism is one of the strongest taboos across cultures. Almost every society on Earth has, at some point, drawn a moral line against consuming human flesh. It feels instinctively wrong to most people. But here's the uncomfortable truth: throughout history, when starvation closes in and all other options disappear, humans have sometimes crossed that line. Not because they wanted to. Not because they were monsters. But because survival exerts a pressure so powerful that it can override even our deepest social rules. To understand the science of cannibalism, we first need to understand starvation itself. The human body is remarkably resilient. When food intake drops, the body doesn't immediately shut down. It adapts. At first, it burns through stored glycogen in the liver and muscles. That energy reserve lasts roughly a day. After that, the body begins breaking down fat for fuel. Ketones rise. Metabolism shifts. Hunger becomes sharp and constant. As starvation continues, fat reserves shrink. Eventually, the body turns to muscle tissue for energy. This is when the real damage begins. Muscle wasting accelerates. The immune system weakens. Organs begin to suffer. Cognition changes. People become lethargic, irritable, confused. In extreme cases, hallucinations appear. Judgment becomes impaired. This isn't just theoretical. We've seen it documented in real-world famine studies, war conditions, and survival scenarios. When calorie intake drops below critical thresholds for extended periods, the brain, desperate to preserve life, prioritizes survival above social norms. Hunger is not just a sensation. It becomes a dominant force shaping thought and behavior. Now, from a purely biological standpoint, human flesh is nutritionally similar to other meats. It contains protein, fat, and trace minerals. In survival terms, it can provide calories. That is the cold, clinical reality. The body does not morally distinguish between protein sources. But the story doesn't end there. Cannibalism is not a single phenomenon. Anthropologists categorize it into several types. There is survival cannibalism, which occurs during extreme famine or disaster. There is ritualistic or endocannibalism, where members of a community consume parts of the deceased as part of mourning or spiritual practice. There is warfare-related cannibalism, historically reported in some cultures. And there is criminal cannibalism, associated with rare pathological cases. Survival cannibalism is the type most people think about in modern times. One of the most well-known historical examples occurred in 1846 with the Donner Party, a group of American pioneers trapped by snow in the Sierra Nevada mountains. As winter dragged on and supplies ran out, some members resorted to consuming those who had already died. The goal was not violence. It was survival. Another case occurred in 1972 when a plane carrying a Uruguayan rugby team crashed in the Andes. Stranded at high altitude with almost no food, survivors eventually made the agonizing decision to consume the bodies of those who had perished in the crash. They debated it extensively. They prayed. They rationalized it as an act of necessity. Many of them later described it as the hardest decision of their lives, but one they believed was required to stay alive. These cases reveal something important. Cannibalism in survival contexts is often preceded by intense psychological resistance. People don't simply switch into it. There is denial, grief, moral struggle, and negotiation. The decision is typically made collectively, with consent, and focused only on those already deceased. Violence for the purpose of obtaining food is far rarer than people imagine in true survival situations. From a biological perspective, though, consuming human flesh carries risks beyond the moral and social consequences. One of the most significant dangers involves prion diseases. Prion are misfolded proteins that can cause devastating neurological disorders. The most famous example linked to cannibalism is kuru, a disease observed in the Fore people of Papua New Guinea in the 20th century. In that community, ritualistic consumption of deceased relatives was practiced as a form of respect and mourning. Over time, kuru spread through the population, causing tremors, loss of coordination, and eventually death. Kuru is related to other prion diseases such as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. What makes prion particularly terrifying is that they are not destroyed by normal cooking temperatures. They resist standard sterilization. They attack the brain slowly, sometimes taking years to show symptoms. This means that cannibalism, especially involving neural tissue, carries long-term neurological risk. Beyond prion, there are also standard infectious disease risks. Humans share many pathogens. Consuming human tissue can transmit viruses, bacteria, and parasites more easily than consuming other animals. In survival scenarios, though, these risks may be overshadowed by immediate starvation. When someone is days or weeks away from death by hunger, long-term disease risk can feel abstract compared to immediate survival, but the science of cannibalism is not just about nutrition and disease. It is also about psychology. Starvation changes the brain. Studies from historical famine events, such as the Minnesota starvation experiment conducted in the 1940s, showed that prolonged caloric deprivation profoundly affects mood, obsession, and moral reasoning. Participants became fixated on food. They experienced depression, anxiety, irritability, and social withdrawal. Although that experiment did not involve cannibalism, it demonstrated how dramatically hunger reshapes cognition. When the brain is deprived of glucose and essential nutrients, higher-level reasoning can deteriorate. Survival circuits become dominant. This doesn't mean people lose all morality. But it does mean the internal hierarchy of values can shift. Preserving life becomes the overriding priority. Interestingly, cannibalism is not unique to humans. In the animal kingdom, it appears more often than we like to think. Certain insects consume mates. Some fish eat their young under stress. Even mammals may engage in cannibalism under extreme conditions. From an evolutionary standpoint, cannibalism can sometimes be a grim but effective survival strategy. In evolutionary biology, there's an argument that strong taboos against cannibalism developed precisely because of disease risk and social stability. Societies that prohibited cannibalism may have had lower disease transmission and more stable social bonds. Cultural taboos can act as protective mechanisms. They encode biological wisdom into moral law. Yet culture is powerful. In communities where ritual cannibalism was practiced historically, it was often framed not as violence but as love or reverence. Consuming a deceased relative was seen as keeping their spirit within the community rather than allowing it to decay. This reframing shows how deeply cultural context shapes perception. In modern society, cannibalism is almost universally illegal and morally condemned. Laws treat it as desecration of a corpse or homicide if killing is involved. But survival scenarios sometimes occupy a legal gray area. Courts have historically shown leniency toward individuals who engaged in survival cannibalism without committing murder. One of the most disturbing legal cases occurred in 1884 with the sinking of the yacht Mignonette. Stranded at sea, 2 crew members killed and consumed a weakened cabin boy. When rescued, they argued necessity. The court ultimately rejected the defense and convicted them of murder, establishing an important legal precedent that necessity does not justify killing an innocent person. This distinction is crucial. Survival cannibalism involving those who have already died is viewed differently from killing someone to eat them. The latter crosses into intentional homicide, which most legal systems categorically condemn. There's also a metabolic reality that often surprises people. The human body is not particularly calorie-dense compared to large livestock animals. From an energy return perspective, cannibalism is not an efficient long-term food strategy. It may offer temporary calories, but it does not solve systemic famine. Historically, widespread famine cannibalism has been a symptom of total societal collapse, not a sustainable adaptation. During severe famines in history, such as in parts of China during the Great Leap Forward or in Eastern Europe during the Holodomor, there were documented cases of cannibalism. These were not widespread cultural practices but desperate acts emerging from catastrophic food shortages. They reflect systemic failure, political, agricultural, logistical, not inherent human cruelty. There is also a psychological aftermath to consider. Survivors who have engaged in cannibalism often carry profound trauma. Even when done for survival, the act can conflict deeply with personal and cultural identity. Many describe long-term guilt, shame, or spiritual crisis. Survival may preserve the body, but the psychological cost can linger. Interestingly, modern science fiction often exaggerates cannibalism as a rapid descent into savagery. But real-world evidence suggests that humans resist it fiercely. In documented survival scenarios, people typically exhaust all other options first. They ration. They forage. They attempt rescue. Cannibalism appears as a last resort, and there's another biological factor: starvation dulls physical strength. Hunting another human would require energy, coordination, and risk. In extreme famine, people are often too weak to engage in violence. This may partially explain why most survival cannibalism involves those already deceased rather than predatory behavior. From a neuroscience perspective, the taboo against cannibalism may be linked to disgust responses. The insula, a region of the brain associated with disgust and moral emotions, activates strongly in response to violations of bodily integrity. Cultural conditioning strengthens this reaction. Disgust acts as a protective barrier, discouraging behaviors that may carry disease risk. Yet disgust is not fixed. Under repeated exposure or shifting context, it can be overridden. History shows that what one culture sees as unthinkable, another may ritualize under certain circumstances. This doesn't mean morality is meaningless. It means morality is shaped by biology, environment, and social structure. There is also the topic of autocannibalism, which sounds strange but includes behaviors like chewing fingernails or picking at skin. These mild forms show that the boundary between self and other consumption is complex. However, they are vastly different from survival cannibalism in scale and meaning. When we examine cannibalism scientifically, we must separate emotion from analysis. Emotion is natural. But science asks different questions. What are the caloric yields? What are the disease risks? What psychological processes occur? What social structures collapse beforehand? What legal frameworks apply? And when food runs out, the timeline toward desperation depends on many variables: climate, access to water, body fat percentage, health status, and community support. Humans can survive weeks without food if water is available, but strength and cognition deteriorate long before death. The true horror of cannibalism is not the act itself in isolation. It is the chain of failures that leads to it. Agricultural collapse, war, isolation, disaster, political mismanagement. Nature can trigger scarcity, but human systems often determine its severity. Modern global food systems are vast but fragile. Supply chains depend on fuel, infrastructure, and stability. While large-scale famine is less common today than in centuries past, it has not disappeared. Climate change, conflict, and economic instability still threaten food security in parts of the world. So when we ask about the science of cannibalism, we are really asking a deeper question: what happens to humans at the edge of survival? What remains of morality when biology screams for sustenance? Are we as civilized as we think, or is civilization a thin layer over ancient survival instincts? The answer is complicated. Evidence suggests that even in extreme hunger, most humans cling to social bonds. They share scarce resources. They protect children. They attempt cooperation. Cannibalism is rare, even in severe famine. That alone speaks volumes about the strength of cultural and moral norms, and yet, history reminds us that under certain pressures, lines can be crossed. Not easily. Not casually. But sometimes, inevitably, understanding this topic does not mean endorsing it. It means confronting reality without illusion. It means recognizing both the resilience and vulnerability of the human condition. In the end, the science of cannibalism is less about flesh and more about thresholds. Biological thresholds. Psychological thresholds. Moral thresholds. It forces us to examine how survival shapes behavior, and how culture attempts to contain it. When food runs out, the body begins to consume itself. That is the first form of cannibalism, internal, metabolic, invisible. Only later, in the most extreme circumstances, does the unthinkable become thinkable, and perhaps the most important takeaway is this: preventing famine. Maintaining stable food systems and supporting communities in crisis is not just about economics. It is about preserving human dignity. The line between civilization and desperation is often drawn at the dinner table. If you found this discussion thought-provoking, if it challenged your assumptions or gave you a new perspective on human survival and history, make sure to like this video. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the science behind humanity's most complex topics. And let us know in the comments, do you think morality would hold if survival were on the line? We'd love to hear your thoughts.